With his long-awaited Brexit plan now receiving close scrutiny in Brussels, Boris Johnson took it to Parliament to try to convince MPs of its merits. Its core element is on replacing the backstop provision of the existing deal, which was intended to maintain an open border in Ireland. He told the Commons that although Northern Ireland would be out of the EU's customs union, new border checks could be avoided.
There will be no need for checks or any infrastructure at or near the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. Instead, under this new protocol, all customs checks between Northern Ireland and Ireland would take place either electronically or, in the small number of cases where physical checks would be necessary, they would happen at traders' premises or at other points in the supply chain.
The precise details of his plan haven't been released, and critics say it's unworkable. Opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn said there was an inherent contradiction in the government's position.
The truth is that after 3 years, this government still hasn't found an answer to solving the issue of the Irish border and the Good Friday Agreement. Where once the government was committed to having no border in Ireland, they're now proposing 2 borders in Ireland.
The Irish border remains the biggest concern for the European Union as well, and for the local business community, who say Johnson's plan will increase costs and bureaucracy. The Prime Minister faces a daunting challenge to convince his own Parliament and the EU before the October 31st Brexit deadline. Neil O'Reilly, Euronews.
Well, for more on this, let's cross over to Westminster, where our reporter Tag Enright is standing by for us. Tag, we just heard from Neil there saying that it looks like a daunting task. Is there any chance that Prime Minister Boris Johnson could get this through Parliament?
Hi, Oliver. Well, when it comes to Parliament here, I think it is, perfectly probable. The key difference this time around is that the MPs who stood in the way of Theresa May's withdrawal agreement, the so-called ultras or extremists within the Conservative Party, have said that they're behind it. So too have the Northern Irish DUP party, on whom Theresa May's government relied for support. But don't forget that just a few weeks ago, Boris Johnson gave up the tiny majority that Theresa May had when he expelled 21 moderate Conservative MPs. They clearly owe him nothing at this stage. But I think crucially for Boris Johnson right now is what could happen with a handful of Labour MPs who said that they would be minded to support his deal. It's not clear, though, at this stage whether he would have enough. For the time being, the Labour leadership and indeed other opposition parties are sitting on their hands when it comes to their plan to take advantage of his minority government by seeking to topple it, tabling a motion of no confidence, because they can't rally around an individual to lead that government. The Liberal Democrat Party saying that the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is not the man to do this. But of course, as we've been talking about throughout, there is this obsession with what might get through Parliament here, ignoring the fact that this deal has to get through Dublin and to Brussels too. And while there has been some praise for the concessions that have been made, I think there's also been a lot of highlighting of what's wrong with Boris Johnson's proposals. And as time goes on, the opposition to them, I think, is becoming a little bit more trenchant. But although this was presented as Boris Johnson's final offer to the EU, he has been studiously ignoring questions today as whether there could be further compromise. That being signalled as that there could be. But might those compromises alienate those extremists, and can all of this be achieved by the October 31st deadline? I think that would be quite a stretch.
Tag, thanks very much. Tag Enright there, just outside of Parliament. Well, for more reaction, let's speak now to Shanga Singham. He's the CEO of Competere and an influential trade policy advisor. Mr. Singham, thanks very much for joining us here on Euronews Now. Just in very simple terms, why do you support this proposal?
Well, one of the things I've done is chair the technical panel of the Alternative Arrangements Commission. We released a 275-page report in July that looked at alternative arrangements for the Irish border and looked at a way of finding a solution to this problem. And I think the government's proposals, we draw, quite significantly on the work that we've done and the stakeholder engagements that we've done in Northern Ireland and in Ireland. I think what you see with this proposal is the UK government climbing down a step or two on the ladder. The DUP climbing down a step or two on the ladder. The DUP opposed, for example, in the past, a regulatory zone for the island of Ireland, just even for agri-food. Now the UK government is proposing a regulatory zone across the whole of the island of Ireland for agri-food and for goods. So that's quite a step. That's quite a concession the UK is making, and what they're not sort of conceding on, and I think where the issue is going to be, is the issue of the single customs territory. The EU has sort of requested that the Northern Ireland and Ireland be in the same single customs territory, which is not really going to be acceptable to the UK. No country is going to accept part of its territory hived off into someone else's customs territory. So I think the EU, that's where the EU, I think, will have to climb down. But I
just wanted to interrupt you there. You said that you have been part of this group that has put forward the proposals for the alternative arrangements. And yet at the end of August, leaked government documents by the very people who were looking at how feasible these solutions would be ruled that all of the things that were being proposed were not workable. The technological solutions haven't been tried yet. They haven't been brought forward. So how viable are these plans? Yes, you support them, but will they work in practice?
So none of that is true. I mean, there's no new technology in the plans that we've proposed, or the plans that the government has proposed. They consist of administrative and technical solutions. One has to differentiate customs declarations, which are electronic filings, from customs checks, which can be done in premises, as we have suggested, and they will only be about 1% of goods.
But those are the very
event.
Same things which this advisory group to the government. Those are exactly the same things which this advisory group to the government said would not work. It was looking at the various different options that were put forward, and it said that the solutions would not work.
No one has challenged the workability of our plans, and what we've suggested in terms of trusted trader programs. They exist all over the world. They frankly exist in Europe. We are a technical panel of 23 of the world's leading global experts in trade, customs. We have people who were involved in the Good Friday Agreement negotiations themselves, and no one has challenged the workability of the proposals. All of the technology that's involved, and technology doesn't drive these solutions. They are entirely administrative and technical, with technological support, of course, but everything is available all over the world. So we haven't faced any challenge in terms of workability. That we're very, very confident about. What does have to change, though, is more of a political decision, which is if the EU's position is there has to be a single customs territory on the island of Ireland, then it's very difficult to see how any deal can possibly be done. And that includes, even if the UK leaves with no deal, any future deal, because both sides will have to come together again, and they'll have to sort out this Irish border issue. And the only solution is to have a mechanism where you have Northern Ireland remaining in the UK customs territory, but with regulatory zones, with all kinds of other mechanisms.
That is so different to what the DUP had previously pledged to. The DUP said they didn't want to have any sort of differentiation in the rules between the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. What has changed that? What have you said to Boris Johnson and to the government in order to get them to change these red lines?
Well, I think what you're saying is accepting that the DUP has moved its position quite a long way, and I think what surprised everyone about the government's proposal was not so much the agricultural and the agri-food special regulatory zone, which was widely talked about. We've been talking about that probably for the last 6 or 9 months, but the move to all goods to be in the EU's regulatory zone, that's quite a significant concession by the DUP. Now, what we've suggested, what others have suggested, government suggested, is you have to have some consent mechanism so that the Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive essentially is making the decision as to whether it follows the UK, if the UK chooses to diverge in those regulatory areas, or whether it decides to follow the European regulatory regime. And
Shanga, I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you there, because that is I'm afraid we're going to have to stop you there because that is all the time that we've got. Thank you very much for sharing your opinions here on Your News Now.